Joe Manchin had penned an op-ed, I guess it was in the Washington Post, saying that he would not vote to get rid of the filibuster and would not vote to weaken the filibuster. Now, if that feels a little bit like whiplash to you, it's because 2 or 3 weeks ago, he was the one who introduced the idea of the talking filibuster and saying that it should be painful in some ways to exercise the filibuster. And that was, I think most people interpret that as a weakening of the filibuster. So it's unclear exactly what's going on here. This is also coming in the wake of the ruling by the parliamentarian the other day that there's more opportunity for more things to be passed through the reconciliation process, but that apparently is also causing some confusion. So it is unclear exactly where the very slim majority in the Senate for the Democrats stands in terms of passing some of these bills. Joe Manchin seems to think that there's 10 Republican votes for measures to protect voting rights in this country or to diminish the power of corporations on their influence on our elections and our elected leaders. I mean, it seems like it's clear that we don't have 50 Democrats, never mind 10 Republicans for that. But here is Joe Biden yesterday having introduced the infrastructure bill, or at least one tranche of the infrastructure bill last week. Yesterday, they introduced sort of the corporate tax element of this, which purports to raise $2.5 trillion over the course of 10 years. In raising the corporate tax rate from 21% to 28%, still, that would put it 7 percentage points less than it was at the beginning of the Trump administration. And also closing the loopholes that allow major corporations to offshore their profits and escape U.S. taxes by basically saying, we're going to levy a 15% tax on what you tell your investors your profit was, not what you tell the IRS what your profits were.
Right. That's probably the more reliable metric.
Indeed. And so here is Joe Biden yesterday being asked or discussing the infrastructure bill. We should say that just before this, a reporter asked him, will you have failed on your promise of bipartisanship if you don't get Republicans on board? The infrastructure bill has 57% support by Republican voters, has 73% support by Americans generally. The reporters are trying to define bipartisanship here in getting 10 Republican senators on board. And that is a framing, I think, that Joe Biden's going to push back against. But here is him response. This is number 2 on him speaking about the urgency of the infrastructure bill.
So here we are. Democrats and Republicans will have ideas about what they like and what they don't like about our plan. That's a good thing. That's the American way. That's the way democracy works. Debate is welcome. Compromise is inevitable. Changes are certain. In the next few weeks, the Vice President and I will be meeting with Republicans and Democrats to hear from everyone. And we'll be listening. We'll be open to good ideas and good faith negotiations. But here's what we won't be open to. We will not be open to doing nothing. Inaction simply is not an option. Now, since I announced this plan, I've heard from my Republican friends say that many of them say it's too big. They say, why not focus on traditional infrastructure? Fix what we've already got, the roads and the highways that exist and the bridges. I'm happy to have that debate. But I want to tell you my view. We are America. We don't just fix for today. we build for tomorrow. 200 years ago, trains weren't traditional infrastructure either, until America made a choice to lay down tracks across the country. Highways weren't traditional infrastructure, until we allowed ourselves to imagine that roads could connect our nation across state lines. The idea of infrastructure has always evolved to meet the aspirations of the American people and their needs. And it's evolving again today. We need to start seeing infrastructure through its effect on the lives of working people in America. What is the foundation today that they need to carve out their place in the middle class, to make it, to live, to go to work, to raise their families with dignity, to ensure that good jobs will be there for their kids, no matter who they are or what zip code they live in?
I'm torn here by the just sheer lunacy of that anybody in Washington, D.C. thinks that the American public cares about what the definition of infrastructure means.
Apparently Republicans think infrastructure is doing nothing, and Biden thinks infrastructure is something different. I mean, this is what they've been quibbling about for weeks, is what falls under the umbrella of infrastructure as the country collectively falls asleep.
I think it was a tweet by Natalie Scherz. She's a writer who said that the Republicans define infrastructure as exclusively what exists for commercial purposes, and Democrats seem to be attempting to define infrastructure in terms of like what helps people generally.
Right.
And I think Biden did a good job of at least addressing that and taking it at face value. I happen to be of the mind that the American public doesn't really feel terribly concerned about what the definition of infrastructure is. But I guess if they've got to do this little dance here and say, well, infrastructure means actually what helps people live their daily lives, as opposed to stuff that is like made out of cement, then great. There's going to be this Kabuki theater. Chris Coons, I think, mentioned yesterday that the deadline, and he, of course, was a key Biden surrogate, and just coincidentally also happens to be one of my least favorite senators. He said May was the deadline. Or mid-May. So
because COVID had that the COVID relief package had that self-imposed deadline by March 14th, I believe, before the benefits from the last relief package expired. This is going to be a lot more of an arduous process just based on the fact that it's open-ended.
Right. And so I think the idea is that we're in the period now where there's going to be, 10 Republican senators are going to go to the White House and they're going to have, coffee and cookies. And then they're going to say, oh, we're close, maybe. And then there's going to be this theater. And then around May, we'll see a reconciliation bill, would be my guess.